Hello, and welcome to Fear Noir. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slowly drifting into dark, mysterious, and unsettling stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the outside world to fade into silence. Tonight, the darkness has a story for you, so close your eyes, listen carefully, and drift into Fear Noir. Story 1. The storm rolled in from the north like a solid black wall, fast and merciless, swallowing the stars and pressing the sea into a single heaving darkness. Wind tore at the cliffs with a high, screaming force, and the lighthouse held its place anyway, an old, crumbling spine of stone, taking every hit of rain and salt spray without moving. Inside, Donovan Kimball slept in short, uneasy bursts under a heavy quilt, one arm thrown over his eyes to block the sudden white flashes of lightning that slipped through warped shutters. He hadn't planned to stay long when he took the job. The newspaper ad had promised quiet and steady money, and that was all he'd needed to hear. Enough to help settle his mother's debts. Enough to keep Margaret comfortable for as long as the cancer allowed. 6 months ago, he'd shown up with 2 battered suitcases and a kind of desperation that makes a person ignore details. He'd noticed the old trunk in the corner of the sitting room, iron clasps rusted shut, and he'd heard the local councilman mumble something about records and old instructions. But there were broken hinges to fix, leaks to patch, gears to clean, and Donovan had pushed the dusty warnings aside as superstition. Even on clear days, the lighthouse didn't feel friendly. The walls groaned when the sun warmed them. The iron stairs trembled underfoot. The whole place seemed to breathe in slow, tired creaks. Donovan had learned to live with that. He'd worked docks long enough to understand old structures, strange noises, and the way the sea could make anything feel haunted. He was practical because he had to be. Tonight, though, as the gale slammed the coastline and the waves smashed themselves against the rocks below, the lighthouse felt sharper somehow. Not just old, not just loud, but alert, as if it knew something he didn't. At 3 minutes past midnight, Donovan woke to a sound that made no sense in the middle of a storm. Knock, knock, knock. He sat up in the dark, blinking, trying to decide if it was real or something his half-sleeping mind had made. For a few seconds, he almost convinced himself it was a dream, stitched together by worry. Then it came again. Louder, more certain. Knock, 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 down at the heavy oak door at the base of the tower. Donovan swung his legs out of bed. The floorboards were freezing against his bare feet. He yanked on his boots without bothering to lace them, grabbed the lantern off the bedside table, and felt the flame inside shiver as the wind pressed against the stone. The light leaned with every gust, like it wanted to go out. He went down the spiral stairs, one careful step at a time. The staircase moaned under him. The lantern threw a slow, swinging circle across the walls and steps, and the shadows that lived in the corners seemed to stretch and retreat with each movement. The air smelled of salt, old smoke, and damp stone. Donovan tightened his grip and muttered a curse just to hear something human. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped and listened. The storm was roaring around the lighthouse, but under that noise he caught it again. The faint, steady tapping against the door. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't panicked. It was patient, like whatever was outside didn't care how long it waited. He crossed the room and put his free hand on the iron latch. He paused there, hesitating, with an old dockworker instinct flickering in his chest. Don't open a door in a storm. Not at night. Not out here. But another part of him pushed back hard. If it was a sailor washed ashore, or someone hurt and freezing, he couldn't stand there and do nothing. He wasn't built for that. He lifted the latch and pulled the door open against the wind. The lantern beam cut into a scene of misery. Rain came sideways, slashing the threshold. The path down to the beach glistened with runoff. Beyond it, the sea looked angry and endless. But there was no one on the step, no silhouette, no hunched figure begging for shelter. Donovan stepped out briefly and raised the lantern higher. The light found only slick rocks and white spray exploding against the cliff. No footprints in the mud. No voice calling from the black. Frowning, he stepped back inside and shut the door, sliding the iron bolt into place with a dull scrape. He stood there a moment, listening to the wind hammer the stone, then turned away. Maybe it was debris thrown by the storm. Maybe a shutter had come loose. Maybe his tired mind had translated random noise into something familiar. Still, as he climbed back up to bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been just outside the reach of the lantern. Something had watched him open that door. Something that now knew the way in. Sleep didn't come easily after that. The storm kept pounding the tower, rattling the windows and sending small shivers through the stone. Donovan lay with his eyes closed, listening to the wind rise and fall. But every time he began to drift, he heard the memory of those knocks inside the storm's howl. He told himself it was nerves. Exhaustion could twist perception. Isolation could play tricks. The lighthouse was perched on the edge of the world, and anyone would feel uneasy here at night. Then the second knock came, and there was no mistaking it. Knock, knock, knock. This didn't feel like someone asking for shelter. It felt like being summoned. The sound rang through the tower's hollow spaces with a clean, sharp weight, like a bell struck in a stone church. Donovan sat up hard and reached for his boots again, hands shaking now. The lantern was cold and dark. He'd forgotten to refill it earlier, and his stomach dropped at the stupidity of it. He cursed, struck a match, and coaxed the flame back to life, shielding it from the draft that seeped through the window frames. The stairs felt longer the second time. The shadows seemed thicker, less like darkness and more like something that pressed back against the light. Donovan kept his eyes straight ahead. He refused to look behind him, even though every nerve insisted there was something just outside the lantern's reach. At the bottom, he stopped again. The oak door trembled slightly on its hinges as the storm hit it. For several long seconds, he stood there, locked in place, thinking about ignoring it and going back upstairs until sunrise. Then he heard another sound. A whimper, faint, almost swallowed by the wind, but real, thin and high, like a wounded animal or a child. It came again, and something inside Donovan tightened hard. He grabbed the latch and hauled the door open. At first he saw nothing but rain and darkness. The lantern beam searched the threshold, the slick stones, the path. No person, no shape moving beyond the light. Then he lowered his gaze. A bundle lay on the doorstep. It was wrapped tight in oilskin and bound with what looked like fishing twine. It wasn't big, about the size of a sack of flour, but it shifted slightly as he watched, shuddering in a way that made his throat go dry. Something inside it was alive, or had been very recently. The smell hit him next, salt and rot like the shoreline after a red tide. Donovan fought the urge to step back. His mind screamed for him to shut the door, bolt it, and let the sea take back whatever it had thrown at him. Then the whimper came again, and he realized it was coming from inside the bundle. He swore under his breath, crouched down and reached for it. The oilskin was soaked through and slick under his fingers. The bundle squirmed weakly as he lifted it, making a sound somewhere between a sob and a wet gurgle. It was heavier than it looked, dense and oddly warm despite the cold air and rain. Holding it awkwardly in one arm and the lantern in the other, Donovan stumbled back inside. He kicked the door shut and slid the bolt into place. The click should have felt like safety. It didn't. It felt like sealing something in. He stood in the center of the sitting room, water pooling around his boots, staring down at what he'd carried in. His stomach churned with dread, but another instinct rose beside it, quiet, stubborn, protective. He set the bundle on the scarred kitchen table. It writhed weakly against the bindings and let out a small, broken sound that made the hairs on his neck stand up. For a long moment, Donovan just watched it breathe. Outside, the storm raged, pounding at the lighthouse like it wanted the door opened again. Inside, the only sound was the wet drip from the oilskin and the thin, labored breathing coming from the bundle. Donovan knew he would open it. He would look. He couldn't not look, and he couldn't pretend he didn't already know, deep down, that nothing good ever came knocking in the heart of a storm. The knife hung above the counter, its wooden handle worn smooth. Donovan took it down with hands he tried to keep steady even as his stomach rolled. The bundle twitched again like it sensed what was coming. Brackish water leaked across the tabletop where the oilskin loosened at the edges. He set the lantern down and angled it so the light spread wide. The shadows beyond the kitchen felt restless, like they were waiting. The storm hammered the stone outside, but inside the room had gone strangely focused. Drip, breath, fire, crackle, nothing else. He pressed the tip of the knife to the oilskin and hesitated. There was still time to push it back out into the rain, to shove it off the step and let the sea swallow it, to close the bolt and pretend he'd never seen it. But something in him, duty, curiosity, stubbornness, moved his hand forward. He cut the bindings, the twine snapped, and the oilskin peeled back with a wet, sighing sound. Donovan pulled it aside in layers, revealing what the storm had delivered. At first glance, he thought it was a child. The shape was close enough. Small limbs curled in, a head too large for the thin body. Then he leaned closer, and the details turned wrong. The skin was pale and translucent, stretched tight over fine bones. Faint veins traced under it, pulsing softly with each shallow breath. Its eyes were huge and black and lidless. No blink, no flinch, reflecting the lantern light like deep water. Along the sides of its neck, gills fluttered, opening and closing in quick, desperate motions, as if it didn't belong in air. It made a weak sound, half sigh and half sob, and shuddered. Donovan stepped back before he could stop himself. His first instinct was raw and ugly. Kill it, destroy it, get it out before it brought something worse. His fingers tightened on the knife, but the creature didn't move toward him. It lay helpless, shaking, its chest rising and falling in thin, ragged breaths. It looked like it was suffering. Whatever it was alive. A memory hit him hard. Margaret in a narrow hospital bed, too small under white sheets, her hand trembling in his. Her voice had been a whisper, but it had cut clean through him. Don't turn away from those who need you, even when you're afraid. Donovan cursed quietly and set the knife down. He couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to kill something that was already struggling just to exist. He found a wool blanket in the cupboard and wrapped the creature carefully. Its skin felt clammy and oddly slick under his hands, like something half-formed. It didn't fight. It only made one small, broken sound that tightened Donovan's throat. He placed it near the iron stove and opened the vents to coax more heat out. The flames guttered, then flared brighter, throwing warm light across the room. The creature curled deeper into the blanket as the warmth reached it, relaxing in a way that didn't feel natural so much as practiced. Donovan watched it for a long time, letting a little tension slip from his shoulders. Then he noticed something on the floorboards near the stove. He knelt, brushed dust aside, and found faint marks carved into the wood. Spirals tangled with jagged lines, a sigil worn nearly smooth by years of footsteps. He didn't know what it meant, but it felt like a warning that had been walked over and forgotten. His unease returned all at once. The trunk, the journals he'd ignored. He looked across the room to the battered trunk, slumped against the wall, its iron clasps rusted shut. He'd dismissed it when he arrived. Just old paperwork, he'd assumed. Old stories, the kind of nonsense people cling to when they live near the sea too long. Now, in the stove's flickering light, the trunk looked less like storage and more like a mouth that had stayed shut for too long. The creature stirred, drawing his attention back, its black eyes fixed on him again, deep and strangely calm. There was something in that stare, something that felt too knowing for an animal. Donovan forced himself to look away. Exhaustion, he told himself, fear, isolation. His brain was making patterns out of terror. In the morning, he promised himself, he would go to town and send word to the mainland. He'd let people with training deal with this. He'd keep the thing alive tonight if he could, then hand the problem off. For now, the lighthouse beam still cut through the storm, sweeping over the sea like it always had, and Donovan stood watch, not understanding that the moment he opened the door, he had done something that could not be undone. The storm didn't ease as the hours crawled forward. If anything, it pressed harder, and the way it hit the lighthouse felt personal, like the weather had intent. Rain hammered the windows in frantic bursts. Wind made the tower groan in low complaints. Donovan sat in the kitchen with the creature bundled near the stove, but his eyes kept drifting to that trunk. He spent an hour drying the creature's slick skin with a towel, coaxing tiny sips of water between its thin lips. Every act of care made him more uneasy. The creature never blinked. Its gaze tracked him slowly, patiently, like it didn't need to rush. Finally, Donovan stood, crossed the room, and went to the trunk. The clasps fought him, but a few hard strikes with the knife handle jarred them loose. The lid creaked open, releasing a stale breath of air, thick with mildew, salt, and old paper. Donovan coughed and waved the smell away. Inside were leather-bound journals, brittle maps, and small objects he couldn't name. At the top sat a cracked ledger with curled edges. He picked it up and flipped it open. The first page listed names, previous lighthouse keepers, with dates beside them. Some spanned decades, some ended after only a few months. Next to certain names, someone had scrawled short notes. Lost to the sea, taken in the storm, service completed. Donovan turned pages, and the writing grew more frantic the deeper he went. Early entries talked about supplies and repairs. Later entries were tight and harsh, full of sleepless nights and warnings that sounded like madness until they didn't. One passage caught him and held him. The barrier weakens. Each generation swears the oath anew, lest the children find a way ashore. Keep the light burning, perform the offerings, renew the wards. Without vigilance, the sea will claim what we stole. The sea never forgot, and neither did what slept beneath it. Donovan's mouth went dry. He set the ledger down like it might bite. He pulled out another journal, smaller and stained, its leather warped by water. Inside were sketches of symbols that matched the carving near the stove. Spirals, jagged lines, figures kneeling at the shore, offering strange bundles wrapped in cloth. Under one drawing, a single word was written with angry force. Packed. Donovan dropped the journal to the floor and stepped back. Heart banging. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon. It was a lock, a seal, a wall built against something that had always been out there in the deep, waiting. Every keeper before him had known, and they'd played their part, rituals, offerings, whatever those words meant. They had kept the light burning not just for ships, but to keep something else from crossing the line. No one had told Donovan any of that when he signed on. They'd handed him keys and a checklist. They hadn't mentioned blood debts or ancient bargains. He had walked into it blind because he'd needed the money and believed in simple explanations. He turned back toward the stove, toward the bundled creature. It lay there breathing shallowly, firelight moving across its translucent skin. It looked fragile, almost pathetic, but Donovan couldn't ignore what the journals implied. By opening the door and carrying it inside, he had broken something that had been held shut for generations. A sound rose from beneath the floor. At first it blended with the wind, but Donovan leaned his head and realized it wasn't outside. It was inside the foundation, below the boards and stone. A deep hum that vibrated up through the lighthouse like a tuning fork. He dropped to one knee and pressed his ear to the floor. Voices. Not loud, not clear, but layered and murmuring, as if a group of people gathered somewhere under the tower. The words were too distant to understand, but the rhythm made Donovan's skin crawl. It was a chant, slow, old, steady, rising and falling like the sea. Donovan stood quickly, breath tight in his chest. The lantern on the table flickered and shadows twisted along the walls, forming shapes that disappeared when he looked straight at them. The storm outside no longer felt like weather. It felt like a thing pressing itself against the stone, testing weak places, waiting for the light to fail. Donovan rushed back to the trunk, hands shaking as he searched through the objects. His fingers closed around a smooth black stone, faintly warm despite the damp air. Strange marks had been etched into it, sigils maybe, lines that made his eyes want to slide away. He looked at the creature again and felt helpless anger rise in him. This wasn't a job. It was a trap, a sentence passed down through people who never asked for it. And the moment Donovan accepted the keys and lit the lamp months ago, he'd chained himself to a war he didn't even know existed. Then the first crack appeared in the lantern glass. Donovan watched as the flame inside sputtered and died, plunging the kitchen into thicker darkness. The shadows that had clung to corners swelled outward, crawling across the ceiling and walls in slow waves that matched the chant below. He stumbled back and caught himself on the table, hands slipping on wet wood. He grabbed the second lantern from the shelf near the stairs and fumbled for matches. It took several tries, fingers too numb and clumsy, before the flame caught. The light came up weak but real, pushing back the dark just enough to breathe. In that weak light, he saw the creature had moved. It wasn't curled in the blanket anymore. It had risen on thin, trembling limbs. Its black eyes locked onto Donovan, and something in its posture made Donovan's stomach twist. There was no helpless whimper now, no fragile fear. It tilted its head, studying him with a calm patience that felt ancient. A scraping sound came from outside. Not the wind, not the rain. Something dragging along stone. Donovan turned toward the nearest window and squinted into the storm. For a second he saw nothing but streaks of water. Then lightning flashed and the world went bright and terrible. Figures pressed against the glass, dozens of them, shapes in shredded sailor clothing, faces bloated and warped by the sea. Their eyes were hollow and accusing. Barnacles clung to ruined flesh. Seaweed hung from their mouths like rotten tongues. They swayed as if the waves still held them. The Watchers. Up above, the lighthouse beam flickered. Donovan could see the weak pulse of it through the storm, the steady heartbeat faltering. He understood without anyone telling him. If the light failed, the lighthouse would become just another piece of stone to be taken. And whatever the lighthouse had held back would spill past the cliffs and into the sleeping land. He looked at the creature again. The truth settled cold in his gut. It wasn't a victim, it was a key, a wedge, something meant to crack the seal. By bringing it in, Donovan had done exactly what the sea wanted. Still, maybe there was a way back. Maybe the sea would take it if he returned it. Maybe the breach could be repaired before everything broke. He grabbed the blanket and lifted the creature in one motion. It didn't resist. It didn't fight. It only watched him, unblinking, like it had expected this from the start. Its skin was cold and slick in his arms. A deep shiver ran through him. Donovan kicked the door open and stepped out into the storm. Wind hit him like a punch, tearing at his coat and throwing icy rain into his face. He staggered onto the slick path, clutching the bundled creature to his chest. Outside, the Watchers turned as one. Their faces lifted and a chorus of low, mournful cries rose above the storm. Some of them began to move, dragging themselves across the ground with wet, impossible motions. Donovan forced his legs to work. He slipped along the broken stones, fell once, slammed his knee against rock, and nearly screamed. But he got up. He kept going. The cliff edge waited ahead, hidden in rain. He reached it and stood there, staring down into the sea that boiled below. Waves rose huge and violent, smashing the rocks and throwing spray high into the air. Donovan held the bundle out over the drop. For a second he hesitated. Margaret's voice surfaced again in his head, soft, stubborn, loving. "Don't turn away." His hands tightened around the blanket. His chest felt like it was breaking in two. Then he forced himself to choose. With a hoarse cry, Donovan hurled the bundle into the churning black. It vanished without a sound. For one breathless moment, everything paused. Then the lighthouse beam flared bright, burning with desperate power. The watchers recoiled, shrieking, and their forms dissolved into mist that the wind tore away over the water. The chanting beneath the lighthouse cut off instantly, as if someone had severed it. Donovan stumbled back from the cliff, chest heaving, ears ringing. He'd done it. He'd acted. He'd sent the thing back. But the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the pause between waves. Donovan backed away from the cliff and started the long climb back, panting, bruised, soaked through. The wind was still fierce, but it didn't feel as alive as before. The rain was still cold, but its rhythm sounded normal now. The clouds cracked a little, revealing thin slashes of pale stars. The lighthouse beam swept steady again, strong and clean, cutting across the water with the old certainty. The great lens spun in its housing like it had a purpose again, like it had won. Donovan looked toward the shore. The watchers were gone, leaving only shredded scraps of cloth and foam swirling in the rocks. The voices beneath the floor had fallen silent. The weight in the air lifted just enough that Donovan could almost believe the nightmare had ended. He pressed a hand to his ribs, feeling bruises bloom under his skin. Pain pulsed down his leg. He welcomed it. Pain meant he was alive. He reached the lighthouse door, braced himself against the frame, and took a few slow breaths to steady his shaking hands. He almost smiled, thinking of Margaret's pride, thinking of how he'd done what had to be done. Then he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The kitchen looked mostly the same. The second lantern flickered on the table. The stove crackled softly, throwing warmth into the damp room. For a few seconds, the lighthouse felt like a place again. Stone, fire, safety. And yet, something was wrong. The air felt heavier than it should have. A smell lingered that wasn't smoke or salt. It reminded him of wet earth turned over after a long rain, of rot brought up from deep places. Donovan shut the door carefully and slid the bolt into place. He turned back to the trunk, meaning to grab more of whatever warding tools the past keepers had left behind. Then the ground vibrated beneath his boots. A low pulse, almost too small to notice, grew stronger with each second. Donovan went to the window and looked out. Down on the shore where the creature had fallen, the sea was moving differently. Not wild, not random. A vast shadow rolled beneath the surface, larger than any ship, pushing water ahead of it like the ocean itself had become a muscle. On the horizon, a new storm gathered, darker, thicker, and wrong in a way Donovan felt in his bones. His throat tightened. Cold dread flooded his chest. What he'd fought wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. It had only been the opening. Donovan stood at the window, unable to look away from the shadow that moved under the sea. It wasn't just big. It was old. It shifted with terrible grace, like something the world had built itself around without remembering. Even from the lighthouse he could feel it, a pressure in his teeth and skull. Above it, the new storm churned with purpose. Lightning flashed inside the clouds, and in the brief light, Donovan saw shapes moving. Too many limbs, too many eyes, forms that shouldn't exist in air. The ocean began to obey, no longer chaotic but ordered, pulled into lines like an army responding to a command. Donovan backed away, legs trembling. The journals had been right. He realized it too late. Once a child of the storm crossed the threshold, the old bonds broke. Returning it to the sea hadn't undone the act. The door had been opened. Something had been invited in. The seal had been cracked. The lighthouse beam still turned, but its light didn't cut through the darkness the way it had. Each sweep struck the storm and vanished, swallowed without reflection. The beacon was shouting into a void that didn't answer. Down on the shore, new shapes climbed from the surf. Not the bloated sailors from before. These stood upright but moved wrong, twisting and sliding in ways a human body couldn't. Limbs ended in finned stumps. Faces stretched into slack amphibian shapes that looked half-made. They poured onto the rocks in numbers Donovan couldn't count. The watchers had only been the beginning. The stones underfoot shook again. A deeper sound rose, not a voice exactly, but something that spoke through vibration, an ancient language made of weight and certainty. It rattled in his bones and made his stomach feel hollow. Donovan gripped the edge of the table just to stay steady. The lantern flame fought the air, sputtering as if even oxygen didn't want to help it burn. It steadied again, but weakly, like it understood it was outmatched. Donovan lowered himself into the chair near the stove, arms heavy at his sides. His thoughts splintered. Margaret's frail smile, the warmth of the blanket, the steady ticking of lighthouse gears on calm days. All of it felt small now, already fading. No message would reach the mainland in time. No ship would cut through those waves. No one inland would wake before the sky broke. Outside, the sea rose higher, and in places deeper than the ocean, something stirred. The storm began to sing, one deep, endless note that seemed to wrap itself around the cliffs, the tower, the bones of the world. Donovan closed his eyes and bowed his head, listening to that terrible song. The children of the storm had come home, and behind them, something older, something hungrier, reached toward the land that had forgotten its name. Story 2. I've known for a while that Melissa had a problem, and I won't pretend I didn't see it coming. I told her more than once that she needed help. We tried therapy, we tried rehab, we tried all the things people suggest when they're scared and running out of options. But none of it touched the one idea she couldn't let go of. And the harder I tried to pull her away from it, the more I realized I was getting dragged in too. Now a price is being paid for that. Maybe it always was. Maybe we just didn't understand the bill until it arrived. This March will make 2 years since everything changed. 2 years since our little boy Rylan stopped being a kid who couldn't sit still and became the name we whisper like a prayer and a wound at the same time. Rylan had just turned 7 back then. He was the kind of child who treated the world like it was built for exploration. Every hallway was a cave. Every backyard was a jungle. If you told him not to touch something, he'd stare at it like it was a treasure map. We decided to take a family trip to the beach. It was only about 45 minutes from home. The first time he'd ever see the ocean in person. I remember how he pressed his face to the window as soon as we got close, like he could smell it before we could see it. When we parked and stepped out, he ran ahead of us, laughing, and the moment his toes hit the sand, his whole face lit up. Melissa was excited too. She wanted him to feel the water, to hear the surf, to remember it. That day looked like a postcard. The sky was open, The breeze was gentle. The waves were steady but not violent. Everything felt safe enough to let your guard down, and we did. My wife has been surfing since before I met her. She's good at it, confident, calm, the kind of person who makes something dangerous look effortless. She'd brought her board with her just in case the weather was right. It was more habit than plan. Rylan saw the board and locked onto it like it was the greatest invention ever made. He begged. He bounced. He grabbed at her hands and asked 100 questions. At first she said no. She told him it wasn't safe. She was firm, and he pouted the way kids do when they don't understand risk. I was the one who talked her into it. I told myself it would be fine. I told myself she'd keep him close. I told myself that with her beside him, nothing could happen. I hate that memory now. How easy it was for me to say it. How confident I sounded. Like a parent's confidence has any power over the ocean. I stood near the waterline with my camera, wanting to film the whole thing. I wanted a perfect little clip of my wife and son out on the water, the kind of moment you save and watch again later when life gets busy. Instead, I filmed the beginning of a disaster. Melissa helped Rylan climb onto the board. She talked to him the way she always did when she wanted him to trust her. Soft voice, steady hands, smiling like nothing could possibly go wrong. She paddled out slowly, letting him trail his fingers in the water. He squealed every time the board rocked. He was laughing so hard I could hear him even over the surf. The waves were rising a little, nothing scary. Just enough that the board bobbed higher and dipped lower. I kept the camera angled, tracking them as they moved farther from shore. I remember thinking how lucky I was. That's what makes it so cruel. Your brain makes a snapshot of happiness right before it tears it away. It ended fast. So fast my mind still trips over the order of events when I try to replay it. A stronger wind came in from the north. It felt like it arrived in one sudden push, not gradual, not predicted. The board shifted. At first, Melissa corrected it like she'd done 1,000 times. She had control. She was steady. I even remember thinking, see, it's fine. Then the board shook hard, like something hit it from beneath or a wave caught it at the wrong angle. Rylan panicked. His arms flailed. Melissa tried to grab him, but the movement threw them both off balance. They fell backward into the water. 1 second I could see them, the next I couldn't. The water looked the same as it had a moment ago, but they weren't on top of it anymore. I dropped the camera and ran. I shouted their names, my voice cracking into something animal. I waded in, then plunged my face under the water, eyes open, searching through the blur and foam. I spun in circles, calling, listening for an answer. There was nothing. Other people saw me. A few swimmers came running. Someone else yelled for a lifeguard. Hands grabbed at the water, searching in every direction. Time started moving in a way that didn't make sense. Seconds stretching out entire lifetimes. Then I saw him. Rylan was face down in the water. His body was small and wrong, like a doll somebody dropped. I lunged for him and pulled him toward me, flipping him over. His head had struck a rock. Blood was spilling from his skull, mixing with seawater and running down his cheek. His eyes were half open but rolled back, not seeing me. I carried him to shore, collapsing onto my knees as people gathered. My hands shook so badly I could barely position him right. I started CPR, pressing his chest, counting through breaths, trying to remember everything I'd ever learned about emergencies. His skin looked too pale, polished almost, like the life had already started draining out of him. I breathed into him. I pushed harder. I begged him out loud, saying his name like it could anchor him here. His body jerked only from my compressions. There was no pulse, no response. Nothing but the awful quiet of a child who has slipped too far away to hear you. I didn't stop. I couldn't. This was my son. My body refused to accept what my eyes were telling me. Eventually, someone pulled me back. I remember hands on my shoulders, voices shouting, someone telling me to let them try, but I fought them because letting go felt like agreeing that he was gone. And then, somehow, I was standing over him, shaking, staring at his small, lifeless body, and I understood it all at once. He was gone. In the middle of that, I heard shouting farther down the beach. Someone yelled that they'd found another victim. I didn't have to ask who. I already knew. They dragged Melissa from the water. Another surfer climbed over her and started mouth to mouth. I stood there frozen, staring at my son as if I could force him back by refusing to look away. I didn't let hope into my chest until I heard Melissa choke and gasp. Water poured from her mouth. She coughed and retched, salt water and bile, her whole body shuddering. Someone rolled her on her side. She kept coughing like she was trying to cough out the ocean itself. I should have been relieved. I should have rushed to her. But I was still staring at Rylan, trying to understand how a life could end in less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes ago, he'd been laughing. 10 minutes ago, he'd been asking if he could do it again. Now he was still, and the world looked the same, and none of it made sense. After that day, Melissa changed. At first, it was the kind of change you expect from grief. Quiet, hollow, a person moving through tasks because they don't know what else to do. We planned a funeral. We picked a tiny casket. We stood in front of people who tried to comfort us with words that felt like paper against a burn. We buried our son. I watched the dirt fall. I felt a part of myself shut down because it had to. Because if it didn't, I would have broken in half right there. But Melissa didn't shut down the same way. She didn't numb out. She went somewhere else inside her mind, and she stayed there. Her eyes looked far away, even when she was staring right at me. She smiled sometimes, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes and doesn't last long. Some part of me knew, even then, that things weren't going to get better the way people promised. I just didn't know they could get worse. A month later, the first incident happened. I came home from work and heard bathwater running upstairs. At first, it felt normal. People take baths. People try to relax. I hung up my coat and started up the stairs, thinking maybe this was a small sign she was trying. Then I saw water creeping out from under the bathroom door, spreading across the floor in a thin stream. My stomach dropped. I knocked. I called her name. No answer. I pounded harder. Still nothing. The door was locked. I grabbed what I could, a heavy lamp, a piece of furniture I don't even remember, and I slammed it into the door like a battering ram. On the third hit, the lock gave. Melissa was submerged in the tub, completely under the water, hair floating like dark weeds. I yanked her up, shut off the faucet, and dragged her onto the tile. I started chest compressions with a kind of panic that makes you forget pain. I pushed and breathed and begged. She choked and sputtered after a few moments, gasping like a person climbing up from a deep place. She stared at me with a look that wasn't shock or fear. It was sadness, disappointment. I wrapped her in towels and blankets. I gave her something to help her rest. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold a glass of water. My first thought was simple. She needed help I couldn't provide. Professional help, doctors, a place where she couldn't be alone with a bathtub and a thought. I called hospitals. I set up counseling. I told her things would get better. I said it out loud like a spell, not because I believed it, but because I needed to hear it too. But life doesn't improve because you say the words. It doesn't care what you want. It just keeps moving. The second attempt was worse. This time I found her unconscious in the tub, lips tinted, skin cold. I spent nearly 20 minutes bringing her back. My hands ached. My arms burned. I remember crying and shouting into the empty house, screaming at God that I couldn't lose her too. When she finally coughed and came back, I didn't call the hospital right away. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I sat down and talked to her like a husband, like a human being, something would click. Maybe I wanted to believe I still had some control. I made her a warm meal. I sat with her. My voice shook when I spoke. What you're doing to yourself, it won't bring Rylan back, I said. Melissa looked at me with a hard, flat expression. You think I'm trying to kill myself? How else am I supposed to see it? I asked. Melissa, this has to stop. I reached for her hand. She pulled away like my touch hurt. She stared out the window, eyes vacant. You don't understand, she said. I can't even explain it. Try, I said, please. She looked like she might cry. I held my breath, hoping she'd finally say the words people say in grief. I miss him. I can't breathe. I don't know how to live. Instead, she told me something else. I've been stuck on that beach ever since that day, she whispered, reliving it over and over. My baby was gone, taken from me. But would you believe me if I told you I knew he was gone before I even woke up? I leaned closer, confused. What do you mean? When I hit the wave, she said slowly, everything went black. I felt nothing. I was nowhere, except I was somewhere. Not the beach. It was warm. I felt grass between my fingers, and there were white tulips everywhere, a whole field of them. I could smell them, Daniel. It was so real. Her voice shook, and Rylan was there too. I couldn't see him, not at first, but I could feel him. I heard a voice like it was muffled, but it was his. He was trying to tell me something, trying to give me something. Then she broke down. He was reaching for my hand, right next to me, and then I was ripped away, back on the beach, gasping for air. It was perfect, fragile. I can still see the light. I can still smell the tulips. And when I saw him face down in the water, I already knew. He crossed over, and I was stuck here. We sat in silence after she said it. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavy, and suddenly her attempts made a terrible kind of sense. You're trying to get back there, I said, the words tasting bitter. That's why you've been doing this. She looked at me like I'd insulted her. You think I'm crazy? I struggled to answer. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her it was impossible. I wanted to tell her I believed her. All at once. Melissa, I started. She told me to leave the room. I tried to explain. I'm not saying you're lying, this is a lot. What you're describing, it sounds impossible. I didn't believe it either, she whispered. Not until I tried last month. I blacked out in the tub. I felt the light starting again, but I didn't get there. I understood what she meant without her saying it. She'd tasted something that felt like Rylan, and now the world we lived in couldn't compete with it. I know you want to hold him again, I said, even once. I know you'd give anything, but this isn't the way. She didn't answer. She stared like she was looking at something far beyond the glass. She promised she wouldn't try again. But the promise didn't feel solid. It felt like something she said to get me out of the room. Rylan and Melissa had been inseparable. Now that she believed she'd felt him beyond death, she wasn't going to stop chasing that feeling. She'd be empty until she found something that felt like closure, even if it destroyed her. So I tried something different. I convinced myself I could help her in a new way. Something safer than a bathtub and silence. I told myself that if she needed something spiritual, maybe we could find a controlled version of it. I suggested a spiritual advisor, a medium, someone who claimed they could reach beyond. Melissa had looked at tarot cards sometimes, so it didn't feel like a huge leap. If she believed the veil had opened for her once, maybe she'd accept someone who promised to open it again. Maybe this is how you reconnect with Rylan, I told her. She agreed. We arranged a séance for the next night. The psychic met us at a small motel outside town. She'd already paid for the room. That made me trust her more than I should have. It felt like she wasn't just here to take money and run. She told us to bring some of Rylan's favorite items, said it would help her tune in. She made us close the windows, lock the door, block out any light. She insisted nothing could interrupt us. Not a sound, not a beam from outside, nothing. We sat cross-legged on the floor in darkness, while she lit candles one by one. The air smelled like wax and perfume. I held Melissa's hand and tried to calm my breathing. Tonight, the psychic said, we'll try to breach the veil. Close your eyes and listen to the universe around you. I did what she said, not because I understood it, but because I wanted Melissa to feel something that wasn't self-destruction. As the second candle went up, Melissa whispered shaky, I don't think this is working. It takes time, the psychic murmured. You can't just demand a connection. We need ritual. I'm going to try to place you into a hypnotic state. Listen only to my voice. I tried. Melissa tried. But all I felt was the hard floor under my legs and the weight of my own skepticism growing heavier. Then the psychic whispered, I hear a voice. Childish laughter. Melissa tensed beside me. No, she said quickly. I feel wrong. Cold. Darkness. Let yourself go to what you sense, the psychic said, lighting the third candle. The air did feel charged, like static, like the room was holding its breath. The psychic told Melissa to extend her hand. She traced lines in Melissa's palm, face tight with concentration. There is a presence here, she murmured. I feel... Wait. She stopped abruptly and pulled back. Melissa started sobbing. I leaned forward, confused, but Melissa shook her head like she couldn't take it. This isn't working, she choked out. Or maybe you don't want to accept what you're seeing, the psychic said. Something inside me snapped. Grief had already taken enough from us. I wasn't going to let a stranger poke at my wife like she was a toy. You're not going to sit here and scam us, I shouted. My wife is breaking and I'm trying to help her. The psychic's expression changed. Annoyed, flustered, offended. She started packing up her candles and cards, refusing to continue after my outburst. I apologized to Melissa, but she shook her head like it didn't matter. "It wasn't the same," she muttered on the drive home. "Nothing like the water, just a hoax." We drove in silence. The road was dark. The car felt too small. After that, I threw myself into research. Near-death experiences, drowning survivors, anything that might explain the craving that had taken root in my wife. Most stories were similar. Bright light, voices, a loved one calling, people describing peace, warmth, floating. Some claimed they watched their own bodies from above. Some talked about dreams that felt more real than waking life. Astral projection, lucid states, all kinds of theories. I read until my eyes hurt, trying to find something that could make this feel less like madness. It took days before I found what Melissa had been doing, people trying to recreate the edge of death on purpose. They called themselves the Flatliners, like that old movie from the 90s about students messing with death to see what comes after. Online, the group sounded almost proud. They swore they didn't want to die. They wanted to get close, look over the edge, and come back with proof. To stand on the brink and see what's there, one person wrote, is the most intense experience you can imagine. Some claimed they'd done it, safely. All it takes is practice and safety, another wrote. Anyone can cross. We need professionals. The knowledge is unlimited. That word, safely, stuck in my head. It wrapped itself around my fear and squeezed. Because if there was a safe way, then maybe Melissa wouldn't keep trying alone in a bathtub. I reached out to someone in the group who claimed he'd completed 2 successful sessions. He called himself Joey. We met after work at a bar that smelled like old wood and spilled beer. He looked me over like he was reading my face instead of listening to my words. Then he said, "You're not the one who's crossed, are you?" "Excuse me," I asked, startled. "Your aura," he said like it was obvious. "It isn't shattered. You're grounded here. So who am I guiding?" "My wife," I said. "Last spring she nearly drowned." Joey's eyes sharpened with interest as I described the field of white tulips and the warmth and the voice Melissa believed was Rylan. "So can you help her?" I asked. "I can help make it happen," he said. "But you should understand something. What she's going through isn't going away." "I don't follow," I admitted. He leaned forward. "You ever known an addict, Danny? You know how they chase that first high, that first perfect feeling." My stomach tightened. "What your wife felt was like that," he said. "She tasted something beyond normal life. Most people never even get close to it. You think one session will fix her? It won't. At best, it slows the craving. At best, it reduces the damage." "But you did it twice," I said. "You came back. You learned control. Doesn't that mean it's possible to overcome it?" He shook his head. "I didn't have ties over there. No soul link. Your son is tied to her. That doesn't just fade. I knew I should have walked away. I knew I should have taken Melissa straight to a hospital and begged for a long-term plan. But grief makes you desperate, and desperation makes you bargain with terrible ideas." That night, I told Melissa about the Flatliners, about Joey, about the possibility of doing it with equipment and supervision instead of alone. "There are risks," I said. "But you already know that." When I handed her the contact information, something flickered in her eyes for the first time in months. Hope, raw and hungry. "Daniel," she said, "I want you there with me." The idea made my stomach twist, but I promised. If I stayed by her side, maybe I could keep her from slipping too far away. Maybe I could keep her from being taken completely. It felt like walking on a razor's edge and pretending you won't bleed. We met Joey in a downtown warehouse. He had equipment laid out like a strange lab. Cables, monitors, power stations, and what looked like a submersion tank, like something meant for sensory deprivation. Since her experience involved drowning, Joey explained, we use the chamber, submerge her, monitor everything. If it gets too risky, we've got a fail-safe. He showed us a console with numbers and graphs I didn't understand. Then he took out a small needle device and slipped it near Melissa's palm. This little prick can save your life, he said. It's one of the only things we've seen cross back and forth between planes. It sounded like nonsense, a magic needle that can pull you back from death. But Melissa didn't question him. She just listened with that intense focus she got when she believed she was close to Rylan. So, Joey said, ready for your life to change forever? Melissa said yes before I could form a thought. He attached heart monitors and leads. Melissa stripped down to her underwear, placed electrodes on her skin with calm hands, like she was preparing for something she'd rehearsed in her mind 100 times. Joey prepared a syringe that he said would stop her heart for exactly 3 minutes. Is that enough time? I asked, voice tight as they sealed the chamber. I kissed her before the lid closed, tasting salt already in my mouth from fear. You lost your son in a few minutes, Joey said. Anything can happen. I sat beside him and watched the monitors. Melissa's heart rate slowed, dropped lower, then it stopped. My own heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. Brain activity still good, Joey muttered into a recorder. Signs of REM, possible subconscious hallucinations. A minute passed, then another. Then the readings started spiking and dropping fast and wrong. Something snapped in me. Something's wrong, I said. Joey stepped in front of the chamber like a guard. I know you want to save her, he said, but she wants this. You see those readings, I shouted. We're losing her. Move. He didn't. I punched him in the nose. I shoved him aside. I forced the chamber open and hauled Melissa up out of the water. She seized violently, vomited blood and salt water. Her body shook like it was trying to tear itself apart from the inside. I grabbed her, trying to hold her steady. She screamed in my face, eyes wild. I was so close, she sobbed. He was right there. She shoved me back and clawed at my face, scraping skin, wailing like an animal. Joey cursed behind us, holding his nose, furious. Melissa demanded we try again. Joey snapped back. Not happening. Not after you decided to knock me out. That's when I noticed something caught between my fingers. Something Melissa must have left behind while scratching me. A petal, a single white tulip petal. I stared at it like it was glowing. It was delicate, soft, real, and it shouldn't have existed. Joey forced us out, demanded we leave immediately. Later that night, he told us we were blacklisted from their experiments. No more sessions, no more help. Melissa blamed me. She snarled that it was my fault, that I ruined everything. I snapped too. My fault? I said. Do you know what it's like watching you do this over and over, trying to die in the house we're supposed to live in? When is it enough, Melissa? What if I can't take it anymore? You don't understand, she whispered. You're right, I said. I don't. Rylan is gone and I'm still here. You don't believe that, she insisted. I hear it. You want this to be real too. I just want you to be okay, I said. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. My hands shook as I pulled the petal from my pocket and held it under the light. Such a small thing, so harmless looking. And yet it made my chest tighten with hope and horror at the same time. Had she actually brought something back? Was it possible the field was real? Or was it possible something else had learned how to send bait through a crack in the world? Melissa stopped talking about the experience after that. But my mind didn't stop. The petals stayed in my thoughts like a splinter. I researched again. I couldn't help it. I needed to know what we were touching. Around that time, I even reached out to the psychic again, hoping she'd tell me what the petal meant. I expected her to laugh or demand money or hang up. Instead, she left frantic voicemails. Her voice sounded scared, like she wanted nothing to do with us anymore. "Listen," she said in one message, breathing hard. "I've been thinking about you two after that night. Look, I'm a con artist, okay? But what happened with you, it was real. More real than anything I've ever felt. There was a presence with us. Just not what you wanted." She rambled after that, but I deleted the message and went back to reading flatliner posts because I didn't want a warning. I wanted confirmation. One thread talked about location, about how the place mattered, not just the method. To truly cross, they claimed, you needed the right kind of death in the right kind of place, a site that already had a connection. I brought it up to Melissa one evening. "We should do something special," I said, "for his memory." She hesitated, fear and longing fighting in her eyes. "I want to go back to the beach," I said, "where everything changed." I knew what I was doing. I knew I was putting the needle in front of an addict and calling it healing, but I couldn't stop myself. Part of me wanted answers more than safety. We drove down early the next morning while the beach was still quiet. Melissa stepped out, breathed in the ocean air, and sank her toes into the sand. She let out a long sigh like she'd been holding her breath for a year. The waves were gentle, rolling in like they didn't remember what they'd done. I brought some of Ryland's favorite things to make a small memorial. The forums said it could strengthen connection, that rituals mattered. Melissa watched the water like she wasn't seeing the present, only the past. "I want one ride," she said quietly. "One wave." I should have said no. I should have grabbed her hand and walked her back to the car. I should have remembered blood in the water and the way my son's skin felt cold, but I didn't. "Please," she said, "for Ryland." So I nodded. She took her board and walked into the surf without looking back. Then she paddled out, the same way she had that day. It felt like time folding in on itself, like we were stepping into a repeating pattern. I pulled out my phone and recorded because some part of me needed proof. I scanned the water for anything, some sign that this was real or some sign it wasn't. For a moment I thought I saw a second shape out there, a silhouette too small to be an adult. Then Melissa jerked forward, catching a wave, and disappeared under the surface. My breath caught. The board came up first, bobbing in the shallows like a piece of driftwood. Seconds crawled. 1 minute, 2. She stayed under for 8 minutes. When she finally surfaced, gasping and coughing, I knew instantly she'd seen something. It was in her eyes, in the way she looked at the world, like it had finally cracked open. "Tell me," I said, voice shaking. "Tell me what you saw." "He sent something back," she whispered. She held out her hand. Petals. a handful of white tulip petals, wet with seawater, stuck to her palm. My knees almost gave out. "What did he say?" I asked. "I think he was trying to tell me there's a way for both of us to communicate," she said, crying. "Both of us?" I whispered. How?" "I don't know yet," she said, clutching the petals like treasure. "But Daniel, do you understand what this means? We can reconnect with our son." And something shifted between us. We weren't arguing anymore. We weren't on opposite sides of belief and fear. We were in it together. Over the next months, we became obsessed. We shared every theory, every thread, every ritual idea. We studied near-death stories like they were maps. We wrote notes. We tried to line up every detail of Melissa's vision and now my growing belief. The flatliner community had talk of advanced methods that extended the experience, dangerous ones. Melissa showed me a thread called the crossover list, names of people who never returned. "There are hundreds," she said, eyes locked on the screen. They went deeper. Then she told me about a street drug the flatliners called N. They claimed it could stop your heart for almost 30 minutes. "If we did that," she said softly, "and put our bodies in the water, think how long we'd have. Think what we could learn. Think of how far we could go." The idea should have terrified me, and it did. But it also hooked into the part of my grief that couldn't accept a closed door. We made a plan. It felt like everything was building toward a single point. A final answer. I convinced Joey to help us again. Or maybe he convinced himself it would be safer if he was there. Either way, he agreed to supervise, to be the one to pull us back if it went wrong. He gave us the special needle again. "For luck," he said, half joking, half serious. Then it was time. We went back to the beach. The waves were rougher that day, hitting the shore with a strange urgency as if the sea was impatient. Joey stayed on land, watching equipment, watching the horizon like he expected something to rise. Melissa and I paddled out side by side. She looked at me and gave me a brave smile, the kind you give before you jump off something high. Then she plunged the syringe into her chest. I did the same. We laced our fingers together as the surf grabbed us. The cold hit like a shock. My instincts screamed at me to fight, to swim, to breathe. But the drug spread fast. My body went heavy, numb, paralyzed. Then the numbness turned into weightlessness, and I began to sink. My limbs faded from my awareness. My vision blurred, light dimmed. I saw my own face like it wasn't attached to me anymore. And then I was gone. At first I felt pulled downward into darkness. Then the ocean wasn't there. The world dissolved and rebuilt itself into something warm and bright. I opened my eyes and found myself standing in a field that seemed endless. White tulips stretched in every direction, swaying in a gentle breeze. The air smelled sweet and clean. The light was soft and golden like late afternoon in a place where nothing bad had ever happened. I stood there, stunned, overwhelmed by how peaceful it felt. Then something touched my hand. I turned and saw Melissa beside me. She took my hand tightly, like she was afraid this place would rip us apart if we let go. We walked forward through the tulips. It felt like hours. Neither of us spoke because speech felt too small for what we were seeing. Then we saw him. Rylan stood ahead with his back to us. Melissa made a sound like her heart was breaking open. "Rylan!" she cried, and joy burst out of her like she'd been holding it in for years. He turned. He smiled, that same smile, perfect and bright, the one I'd been starving for. I felt tears running down my face before I realized I was crying. I heard his voice in my mind, calm and warm and loving. He reached out to us, and everything in me wanted to run, to grab him, to never let go. We stepped forward, hands shaking. Rylan touched our hands, and for a heartbeat, it felt real. It felt like he was telling us he was glad we were there, like he didn't want us to leave, like this was where we belonged. Melissa dropped to her knees, kissing his face, whispering his name like a prayer. "My baby," she sobbed, "you're perfect." She touched his cheek, trembling. "Even his scar is gone," she whispered. I leaned in and saw it too. The small scar under his eye, the one he got at 5, was gone. His skin looked flawless, too flawless, like a painting. Perfect, too perfect. Melissa's fingers slid across his palm. Her whole body went still. "Something's wrong," she said, voice cracking. I froze. "What?" "This isn't our Rylan," she whispered. "It isn't him." The tulips around her feet moved. They didn't sway. They tightened. They began to close in, curling like fingers around her ankles. My stomach turned to ice. I stepped back. Light exploded across the field, blinding and violent, and vines erupted from the ground. They wrapped around our wrists and legs, yanking us down. Melissa screamed. I tried to pull free, but the vines tightened like ropes. I looked at Rylan, at the thing wearing his face. His eyes widened in a way that wasn't human. His mouth split, tearing open past the limits of bone. His body bent backward, cracking, and tendrils burst from his spine like roots breaking through soil. His chest collapsed inward, then opened into 4 gaping mouths lined with teeth. They hissed and shrieked. The ground split open. The field tore like paper, revealing a pit beneath, flesh and bone, a chasm that swallowed the tulips and the light and the idea of peace. From inside it came screams, bodies, thousands of them, writhing, reaching, trapped. A million souls caught in something that never ended. Melissa fought like an animal, clawing at the ground as the vines dragged her closer. The thing that looked like our son loomed over us. Black ooze poured from its stretched neck and struck us, pinning us down. It crawled over my face, into my mouth, stealing my air. I remembered the failsafe. I grabbed Melissa, wrapped my arms around her, and with the last bit of strength I had, I drove the needle between us. The last thing I saw was Rylan's face collapsing into something worm-like and wet, eyes turning into dark pits, mouth unhinging to swallow us whole. Then the jolt hit. It felt like being fired out of a cannon from the bottom of the ocean. I coughed up salt water and air at the same time, choking, gagging, clawing at the sand. My chest burned. My throat tore. Wind slammed into my lungs like a miracle in an assault. Joey stood over me, staring like he didn't fully believe I'd returned. Melissa surfaced nearby, screaming, disoriented, thrashing as if she was still tangled in vines. I dragged her toward me. She clung to me, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Only then did the psychic's warnings make sense. There had been a presence on the other side, just not the one we wanted. Back home, I played her voicemails again. I listened to every word because now I understood what she'd been trying to say. "It's calling to you," the psychic had said, voice shaking, like the old sirens called sailors. "It sings so sweet you can't resist. Your wife heard it first when she went under. Now it's set the bait. Those petals. They're what it uses to lure you in. We had never seen Rylan, not really. The tulips and warmth and perfect face weren't a gift from our sun. They were a trap, a costume, a hook buried in love. Something ancient had learned the shape of our grief and used it against us. And the worst part is the truth I don't want to say out loud. Even after what we saw, even after the horror, I can still hear it. That voice that sounds like my boy, that warmth that feels like home. It lives just past the edge of perception, tugging at the weak parts of my mind. It knows how to find us now. It knows what we want. It knows what we'd sacrifice. And I'm terrified because I don't know how long we can resist. Not Melissa, not me. We tell ourselves we'll never go back. We swear it. We promise. But the craving is there, growing like a shadow behind every quiet moment, like a song you can't stop humming once you've heard it. We passed the point where the door could be shut. Now we stand at the edge, listening, and sooner or later I know what will happen. There will be no fighting it. There will be no coming back. We will sink together. Story 3. The first thing I found was an eyeball. It happened during one of my usual morning walks through the woods behind my old farmhouse. I had walked that same path hundreds of times before, so nothing about it should have felt strange. But that morning something caught my eye almost immediately. Sitting on the forest floor right between a patch of dead leaves and dry dirt was a small, milky white object reflecting the sunlight. It stood out in a way that felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. When I got closer, I realized what it was, an eyeball just lying there, clean and intact. It looked fresh, far too fresh. There were no signs of decay, no damage, no tearing. It wasn't crushed or eaten or even dirty. It looked like it had simply slipped out of something's head moments before I found it. I stood there staring at it longer than I should have, trying to figure out what kind of animal it could have come from. It was small, but that didn't narrow things down much. Eventually, I told myself it was just one of those things you come across when you live out in the middle of nowhere. Dead animals, strange remains. It happens. I forced myself to move on and continued my walk. I didn't think much about it until later that evening when I noticed my cat was missing. She was always inside. I never let her out, not even by accident. At first, I thought maybe she was hiding somewhere, but after searching every room, every corner, and calling her name over and over, I realized she was gone. Completely gone. That's when the image of the eyeball came back into my mind, and this heavy, uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. That night, I barely slept. Living out in the countryside means you're used to silence, but that silence felt different. It felt deeper, like something was watching or waiting. I kept thinking about what could have happened to my cat, but no answer made sense. Eventually, I drifted off into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling worse than usual. My body felt heavy, like I hadn't really rested at all. I dragged myself out of bed and went downstairs to make coffee. I remember picking up the coffee pot, still half asleep, when something felt off. My grip didn't feel right. I looked down at my hand. My pinky finger was gone. At first, my brain refused to process it. I dropped the coffee pot and it shattered across the floor, glass scattering everywhere. I just stood there, staring at my hand, counting my fingers again and again like I was trying to prove myself wrong, but I wasn't wrong. There were only 4 fingers. I turned my hand over, expecting to see blood or at least some kind of wound, but there was nothing. No cut, no scar, no swelling. It was like that finger had never existed, like my hand had always been that way. Panic started to rise in my chest. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called the nearest hospital. A tired-sounding woman answered, asking how she could help. I told her I needed an appointment for an injury. She asked what kind of injury, and I hesitated before saying my finger was gone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. More serious now. She asked how it happened. I told her the truth, that I didn't know, that I woke up and it was just gone. Another pause followed, longer this time. I added that there was no blood, that it looked like it had healed already. She sounded unsure, like she didn't know what to say, and eventually told me she would transfer me to another department. After a short wait, another woman asked me the same questions, and then told me the earliest appointment they had was Friday afternoon, 5 days away. I didn't have much choice, so I agreed. After hanging up, I just stood there in the kitchen, staring at my hand again, trying to make sense of it. I cleaned up the broken glass and then went upstairs to search for my missing finger. I checked everywhere. Under the bed, between the sheets, in the corners of the room. I even got down on my hands and knees and searched the floor inch by inch, but there was nothing. No sign of it anywhere. Eventually, I gave up and tried to go about my day like normal. I needed groceries, so I got in my car and started driving to the nearest store, which was about 30 minutes away. For a while, I managed to push everything out of my mind, but about halfway there, something on the side of the road caught my attention. At first, it just looked like roadkill, something I would normally ignore, but something about it made me slow down. Maybe it was the way it was lying there, or maybe it was just the memory of the eyeball and my missing finger creeping back in. I stopped the car and reversed. It was a deer, but something was wrong, very wrong. The body was lying on its side, its head twisted at an unnatural angle. Its mouth was open, tongue hanging out like it had been caught in the middle of a scream. But the worst part was that it had no legs, none at all, just a torso and a head like the limbs had never existed. I stepped out of the car, feeling sick as I got closer. The body looked fresh, just like the eyeball had. There was no smell, no signs of decay, no flies buzzing around. And where the legs should have been, there was nothing. No torn flesh, no blood, no damage. It was smooth, like the deer had been born that way. I stood there staring at it, my stomach twisting into knots. Without thinking, I put my hand in my pocket, feeling the absence of my pinky again. That's when it hit me. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. I got back in my car and drove home without going to the store. I didn't feel like eating anymore anyway. That night I went to bed hungry, but sleep didn't come easily. When I finally woke up, it felt like I had been unconscious for days. I checked the time and saw it was already 1 in the afternoon. 14 hours had passed. I sat up, confused, and yawned. But something felt wrong immediately. My mouth didn't feel the same. My tongue moved over my gums, expecting to feel my teeth, but there was nothing there. Just soft, uneven flesh. My heart started racing as I reached into my mouth with trembling fingers. My teeth were gone, all of them. I rushed to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My gums were smooth with faint impressions where my teeth should have been, like they had never grown in at all. There was no blood, no damage, nothing to suggest they had been removed. I tried to speak, but my words came out slurred and weak. Panic overwhelmed me. Then I remembered my dog. I ran downstairs and found him lying on the floor. He barely moved when I approached, which was already strange for him. He was always energetic, always happy. But what I saw next made my knees go weak. His eyes were gone. Not missing in a violent way, but gone in the same impossible way as everything else. The shape of his skull had changed, curved inward where his eyes should have been. His fur covered the empty spaces like nothing had ever been there. I dropped to the floor beside him, shaking, unable to process what was happening. I searched the entire house again, desperately hoping to find something, anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. That's when I thought about the woods, about the eyeball. I had to check. When I went to open the front door, it stopped halfway, like something was blocking it from the outside. At the same moment, I heard a deep, painful animal sound, something large. I froze, then slowly moved to the window beside the door and looked outside. At first, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then it became clear, and I wished it hadn't. A massive bear's head was lying on my porch. It wasn't attached to a body. Instead, there were long, pale tubes coming out of the base of its neck, connected to its organs, which were just sitting there in the open air. Its lungs were moving, its heart was beating, and its eyes were staring right at me. It was alive. It made a low, horrible sound, and its head shifted slightly. I stumbled back, barely holding myself together, and slammed the door shut. I didn't leave the house again that day. I stayed in the living room with my dog, too afraid to move, too afraid to think. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, waiting for something to happen. And something did. A bright, blinding light suddenly filled the room from outside. I turned toward the window, squinting against it. Beyond the trees, I could see a massive shape, something huge, glowing with an unnatural light. The ground started to shake. A high-pitched sound rang through the air, painful and sharp. One of the lights focused directly on me, and I felt a strange, tingling sensation in my body. I ran. I locked the door and rushed upstairs, my heart pounding. But as soon as I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped. There was something standing in the hallway. It was tall and thin, almost impossibly so. Its limbs were long and uneven, and its skin looked gray in the light. Its head was too large for its body, hanging slightly forward as it took a step toward me. I didn't wait. I ran into my room, slammed the door, and locked it. I could hear it walking through the house, heavy steps moving slowly downstairs. I didn't move for the rest of the night. When morning came, I finally forced myself to leave the room. I went downstairs carefully, afraid of what I might find. In the middle of the floor was a piece of black fur, my dog's tail. That was enough. I didn't pack anything. I didn't think. I just got in my car and drove. I drove for hours until I reached a town I didn't recognize. I rented a motel room, trying to convince myself that I was safe now, that whatever was happening was over. But this morning I woke up in that motel bed and checked the time. It was noon. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. Something was wrong. I pulled the blanket off my body and looked down. Both of my legs were gone. And just like everything else, there was no blood, no wound, no sign they had ever been there at all. Story 4. I should start by giving a little background so this makes some kind of sense. I do not want to use my real name, so you can call me Adam. About 5 months ago, I finally moved out of my parents' house after finding a job posting that looked almost too good to be real. It offered work and a place to live in the same deal, with a small apartment included above the business. I will not go too deep into what my life was like before that, but I was desperate to leave. I needed distance. I needed quiet. I needed a chance to start over somewhere that was not tied to everything I had been trying to escape. So even though part of me knew the offer sounded strange, I took the chance anyway. When I first called the number on the posting, an older woman answered. Her voice was warm and gentle, the kind that instantly makes you picture someone kind-faced and polite. She took down my name, answered some of my questions, and explained the job in a calm, matter-of-fact way. I told her honestly that I was suspicious. I mean, who would not be? The pay was good, the apartment was included, and the whole thing sounded far better than anything I had any reason to expect. She did not seem offended by my doubt. Instead, she simply told me that they had been having a hard time finding someone who would stay longer than a few weeks. That alone should have been enough to make me walk away. It was an obvious warning sign, and I did try to ask for more information, but she became vague whenever I pressed too much. A smarter person probably would have ended the call right there, but I was not making the choice from a place of comfort. I was choosing between a suspicious opportunity and going back to a life I could not stand anymore. In the end, desperation won. The job was in a very small town, a few miles away from where I grew up. I was supposed to run a local general store. I would handle everything from opening and closing to cleaning, helping customers and stocking shelves, except for ordering inventory. The woman explained that they took care of shipments on their side, and all I would need to do was unload and shelve whatever arrived. It sounded simple enough. The only problem was that I did not have a car, so I had to ask a friend to drive me there. I explained the whole situation to him on the way. He thought it sounded weird, too. He said so more than once, but he also knew what things had been like for me, and he understood why I was willing to risk something strange if it meant getting out. He did not try too hard to stop me. Part of me wishes he had, but that is easy to say now. The town was called Pinewood, which felt almost funny in a sad way, because it really was buried in the middle of a pine forest. The name was exactly as plain and predictable as the place itself. When we first drove in, though, I felt something wrong almost immediately. It is hard to explain. The town itself looked normal enough in the way old rural towns do, but the atmosphere felt off. The streets were quiet in a way that did not feel peaceful. It felt watchful. There were people outside here and there, standing on porches or near storefronts, and almost all of them turned to look at us as we passed. They did not wave. They did not smile. They just stared. It was the kind of staring that makes you feel like you have interrupted something without meaning to. Even my friend, who usually laughed things off, kept glancing at me and asking if I was absolutely sure about this. I cannot even blame him. The place looked like the setting of every small-town horror story I had ever heard. But compared to the thought of going back home, even that felt bearable. I remember thinking, half joking and half serious, that if I had to choose between living in a creepy town and returning to my parents, I would rather live with a murderer. The store was near the far end of the main road that cut through town. It was an old general store with weathered wood, faded paint, and the kind of worn-down appearance that somehow still had a little charm to it. It looked like it had been there forever. The woman I had spoken to on the phone was waiting by the entrance. Unlike the others in town, she did not stare at us like we were intruders. She smiled the second she saw me. She looked to be somewhere in her 70s, maybe older, with neat gray hair, bright eyes, and the sort of warm face that instantly lowered your guard. For the sake of telling this, I will call her Sylvie. Sylvie greeted me like I was a guest she had been excited to meet, rather than some stranger desperate for a job. She was cheerful, kind, and full of easy warmth. She thanked me for coming, told me how much the town relied on the store, and spoke in the sweet, slightly teasing way older women sometimes do when they have decided they like you right away. I thanked her too, probably too much because I really did feel grateful. Whatever strange feeling I had in town faded a little while I stood there talking to her. My friend brought my 2 suitcases out of the car, and Sylvie noticed them immediately. She asked if that was everything I owned. I told her it pretty much was. Most of it was just clothes, an old laptop my friend had given me after he bought a new one, and a few other small things. Sylvie nodded like she understood more than I had actually said. She mentioned that if I ever needed clothes, there was a tailor in town named Mr. Corrigan, and that if I needed anything sold in the store, I could take it and have the cost deducted from my pay at a discount. It was a practical thing to say, but there was something gentle in the way she offered it, like she was trying to make sure I knew I would not be left helpless there. When I looked down the street, it seemed almost empty. For a moment, it reminded me of one of those places people leave behind after the world ends. Sylvie must have noticed the look on my face because she explained that most of the residents were older and that the town got especially quiet in the late afternoon and evenings. There were a few younger people, she said, but most of them had gotten used to the slow pace. She also joked that people appreciated quiet at night because old folks needed their beauty sleep. She laughed after saying it, and it was such a harmless, friendly laugh that I found myself relaxing again. Then she led me through the store and up to the apartment. The store itself was small but cozy in its own way. A few aisles, stocked shelves, coolers in the back, and a checkout counter near the front. Behind the register was a shelf filled with cigarettes and a mirror, angled so I could see part of the store while standing there. There were no security cameras. At the time, that did not strike me as too strange. In a tiny, quiet town, maybe theft just was not much of a concern. Near the counter was a storage room filled with shelves and a freezer along the back wall. Inside that room were 2 more doors. One led outside to the back of the building where the garbage bins were kept. The other led to the stairs up to my apartment. At the top of the stairs was a narrow hallway with dim yellow lighting and the steady fluorescent buzz that seems to belong in every old building. My apartment door was the first one. At the far end of the hall was another door. That one caught my attention right away. It had several locks on it, more than seemed normal, and unlike my door, it did not have a peephole. Even from where I stood, it looked strange. I remember thinking maybe it led to another apartment or a storage room, but I did not ask at the time. I was too busy trying to take in everything else. When Sylvie unlocked my door and let me in, I was honestly stunned. It was not fancy, but to me it felt almost unbelievable. Right inside was a small living room with an old floral couch. Beyond that was a dining area across from a kitchen that looked like it had not been updated in decades. Yellow wallpaper, old cabinets, dated fixtures, all of it worn but clean. Some people probably would have called it ugly. I thought it felt like home, or at least like the kind of place that might become one. Down a short hallway was the bedroom and bathroom. The bed looked used but fine. There was a decent-sized closet and a desk by the wall. The bathroom had everything I needed, including a mirror placed directly where I would have to look at myself on the toilet, which I hated immediately. Still, none of that mattered. I had a roof over my head, a lock on my door, and a quiet little place that was mine. After my friend left, Sylvie stayed a little longer. She put a kettle on and made tea, and we sat at the dining table while the last light of the day filtered through the windows. She apologized that the place was not more modern, saying she knew young people liked fancier things. I told her truthfully that it was more than enough. It was more than I had ever expected. Then she asked why I had taken the job. There was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. I almost told her the truth, or at least some of it, but I did not want to spill my whole life to a stranger on the first day. So I simply said that I wanted a fresh start and needed to get away from some things. She studied me for a moment, then nodded and did not push. I appreciated that more than I can explain. I asked her why she was hiring someone to run the store and give them the apartment too. It still felt too generous, too convenient. She laughed softly at how awkwardly I asked it, then explained that she used to run the store with her husband. After he died, their son took over for a while, but after only a few months he became tense and unhappy, and eventually left town. She said he never fully explained why. There was a sadness in the way she said it, like there was more to that story than she wanted to share. After her son left, she had considered running the store herself again, but she felt too old. There was no one else in town to take it over, so she began hiring outsiders when she could. She added that a few people had done the job before me, but none of them ever stayed very long. When I asked why, she said they always seemed stressed and worn out, as if the work took too much out of them. She made it sound normal, but something about her answer felt incomplete. I noticed it, but I was in no position to challenge her. I needed that job. I needed that apartment. So I let it go. For the first month, things were good. Better than good, really. Peaceful. I woke up around 6 every morning, ate breakfast, showered, and opened the store at 7. I kept my laptop at the register because Sylvie told me I could use it during slow hours as long as the store stayed stocked and clean. Most days were quiet, with only a handful of customers coming in now and then. I got to know the people of Pinewood, and once I was not just the stranger driving through, they actually seemed kind. Odd, yes, but kind. Mr. Corrigan, the tailor, dressed like he belonged in another century and spoke with a British accent. He loved telling wild stories that sounded completely impossible. According to him, He had been a soldier, a spy, a scientist, a hunter, a relative of nobility, and some kind of legendary ladies' man. I never believed half of what he said, but he was entertaining. Miss Morgan carried herself with perfect posture and old-fashioned manners, like she had stepped straight out of the Victorian era. She could sound a little superior at times, but she was never cruel. Then there were the Ladens, a husband and wife who worked as the local doctor and veterinarian. They were some of the youngest people in town, maybe late 30s or early 40s, and they had 2 children only a bit younger than me. There were others too, enough that before long I knew almost everyone by name. Pinewood began to feel less like a warning and more like a strange but charming place, where I might actually belong. That is what makes what happened next harder to explain, because the bad part did not start with anything obvious. It started with a feeling. Somewhere around my 2nd month there, I began to feel like I was being watched. At first it was small enough to ignore, a little shiver now and then, a quick glance over my shoulder. I have dealt with anxiety for most of my life, so I am used to the way fear can create its own shadows. I told myself it was nothing, but the feeling kept growing. It was strongest in the hallway outside my apartment, especially near my door. Every time I stood there, I felt like something unseen was staring directly at me from just behind my back. It was the kind of feeling you get when walking alone down a dark alley at night, when every instinct tells you not to stop moving. I started telling myself that my anxiety was getting worse and that I should probably talk to Mr. Layden about it. After all, feelings are easy to dismiss. They are not proof of anything. Then one night I woke up suddenly, fully alert for no clear reason. The room was dark, but it felt darker than usual somehow, as if the air itself had grown heavy. I was in my own bed under my blanket, but I had this immediate, terrible sense that something was wrong. My first thought was that I had just had a bad dream. Still, I looked around the room. There was nothing there. Nothing moved. Nothing made sense of the fear that had ripped me out of sleep. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it had come from the window, maybe a branch hitting the glass. But there were no tree branches close enough for that. Then I wondered if someone was knocking at the front door, but that made no sense either. It was the middle of the night. The sound stopped long enough that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. This time there was no doubt. The sound was real. Every muscle in my body went tight. I started trying to explain it away. Maybe a mouse in the walls. Maybe some strange pipe noise. Maybe the old building settling. Then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes moved to my bedroom door. I always sleep with it shut, even when I live alone. Maybe that is strange, but having a closed door between me and the rest of the world has always made me feel safer. The tapping was coming from the door, not near the floor where some small animal might have been, not from somewhere else in the apartment. It was at about chest height, right in the middle of the wood. Something on the other side was tapping on it in sets of 3. I froze there, trying to think. There would be 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. No voice, no footsteps, just those calm little taps, as if whatever was outside knew exactly how much worse that was than pounding. A burglar would not do that. A normal person would not do that. My mind raced through every possibility, each one worse than the last. Was it some lunatic? Was someone trying to scare me? If someone had already gotten into the apartment, why not just come in? Why stand outside my bedroom door, tapping like that? I looked around for something I could use as a weapon. I had no bat, no gun, nothing useful. Then I remembered the box cutter on my nightstand. I had accidentally brought it upstairs in my pocket after closing the store and had left it there before bed, so I would remember to take it down in the morning. It felt pathetic compared to whatever might be outside that door, but it was all I had. I grabbed it, extended the blade, and slowly got out of bed. The carpet helped hide my footsteps as I crossed the room. My plan, if you can call it that, was to press my ear to the door and try to hear what was on the other side. Looking back, that was a terrible idea, but clear thinking does not come easily when fear takes over. I got closer and closer until suddenly another thing hit me so hard it stopped me in place. The smell. Years ago, when I was a kid, a raccoon got trapped somewhere in the walls of our house and died there. Eventually, it started to rot. The smell was so awful that even my father, who ignored almost everything, had no choice but to deal with it. Rot has a very specific smell, and once you know it, you never really forget it. That same stench was coming from the other side of my bedroom door. It was thick and foul and unmistakable. Somehow I had not noticed it from the bed, but now, only a step away, it was overwhelming. I covered my nose with one hand and leaned closer, forcing myself to listen. There was nothing, no breathing, no shuffling, no sound at all. Then the door exploded with noise. The soft tapping became violent slamming, so sudden and loud that I stumbled backward and nearly fell. Something hit the other side of the door again and again with enough force to make the whole thing shake in its frame. It sounded like it wanted to tear the door off its hinges. I panicked completely. Whatever courage had gotten me to the door vanished. I ran across the room and shoved myself under the desk, like a terrified child, still clutching that tiny box cutter. The banging kept going. It felt endless. Every hit made me think the door would burst open any second. I do not know how long I hid there before I finally broke and shouted, "Please go away." The pounding stopped instantly, not faded, not slowed. It stopped all at once, like it had been waiting for me to speak. I stayed under the desk, too afraid to move, waiting for it to start again, but it never did. There was no tapping, no smell, no footsteps leaving, nothing. At some point I must have passed out from exhaustion, because the next thing I remember is waking up there, curled on the floor with the morning light creeping into the room. For a few seconds I was disoriented enough to think it had all been a nightmare. Then I realized I still had the box cutter in my hand and that I was not in bed. The memory came flooding back so fast it made my stomach twist. I stared at the bedroom door. It looked normal. No cracks, no damage, nothing to suggest anything had happened at all. Still holding the knife, I stood up and approached it. The smell was gone. My hands were shaking as I opened the door and stepped into the apartment. There was nothing there. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing was broken. I checked every room, every corner, every closet, and found absolutely nothing. The whole apartment looked exactly as it had the night before. I was almost ready to believe I had somehow dreamed the entire thing, despite the fact I had physically woken under the desk. Then, on my way back to the bedroom, I noticed something on the carpet by the door. 2 damp spots. They were shaped like footprints and were already fading, as if whatever moisture made them had nearly dried up. They were faint, but they were there. I know what I saw. After that, things were quiet again for several days. If it had only happened once, maybe I would have forced myself to explain it away. But it did not stop. 5 or 6 nights later, it happened again. Then again. There was never a fixed pattern. Sometimes there were only a few days between visits. Sometimes more than a week would pass. But no matter how long the calm lasted, the tapping always returned. It always came at night. It always came in threes. And each time it seemed a little more aggressive than before. It has been months now. I barely sleep. Even on the quiet nights, I lie there waiting for it, listening for that first sound. The feeling of being watched has gotten worse too, especially in the hallway outside my apartment. Every time I climb those stairs, I feel like something is standing just behind me, close enough to touch. I have thought about telling Sylvie so many times, but I am terrified of what she might say. Maybe she would look at me like I was losing my mind and tell me I need to leave. Maybe she knows exactly what this is and has been hiding it from me the whole time. I do not know which possibility scares me more. Tonight feels wrong again. I cannot explain how I know, but I do. The air feels heavy in that same way it did the first night. My stomach has been tight all evening. I keep checking the locks, even though part of me knows locks will not matter if this thing can already get inside. I do not know what it wants. I do not know why it only taps and waits and comes back. I do not know what was standing outside my bedroom door with the smell of death clinging to it. I only know that it is going to return. I am scared. I am exhausted. And I am running out of ways to convince myself this can be explained. Please tell me what to do. Story 5. My job was mainly cutting things open and studying them. The creatures we worked on looked almost human on the outside, but inside they were completely wrong. They had learned how to copy our skin, our shape, even the small details like hands and faces. Sometimes we still got strange ones brought in, with tails or hooves or bodies that didn't quite make sense, but most of them could pass as human at a quick glance. It was what was inside them that gave them away. Their organs were never right. They didn't understand how a human body should work, so they filled themselves with shapes and pieces that looked like they were trying to imitate something, but always failed in strange and disturbing ways. The lab lights above me gave off a dull, constant buzz. They were pale and lifeless, making everything look sick and drained. I finished the last sip of my tea, just as I heard the sound of the operating table being pushed in. The wheels screamed as they rolled across the floor, dry and ungreased. The heavy metal doors opened slowly, dragging out a long, painful sound, and the subject was brought in. The creature lying on the table had taken a strange approach to its insides. Its body was open, showing something that looked like organs, but they were shaped wrong. Spread across its chest and stomach were twisting forms, and inside them were faces, dozens of them. Each face had a different expression. Some looked like they were in pain, others looked angry, some looked like they were silently screaming. One of the larger shapes, which I guessed was meant to be its heart, stretched into a long, spiraling face. It reminded me of a famous painting, something I had once pointed out to Amy during one of our earlier shifts. Amy was new. She had replaced the last surgeon who worked in this lab. The department had lost several people recently after an accident, with restraints that should have been secure. The man before her had not handled things well. He had been taken off the job after his mind broke down under the stress of working with one of the subjects. I had only been here for 2 weeks myself, but that still made me more experienced than her. Before this job, my life had been going nowhere. I used to work as a cashier, staring at a screen all day, dealing with people who all blended together. It was exhausting in a different way. At least here, even though the work was disturbing, it felt meaningful. I had studied these creatures during my degree, writing about them, trying to understand them. When I was offered a chance to work directly with them, I accepted without hesitation. The strain on my eyes was less here, even with the mask limiting my view. I adjusted the straps of my mask, making sure it was tied tightly. Then I turned slightly and looked at the sign on the wall, testing my side vision. The words were simple and clear. No face, no name, no voice. It was more than just a rule. It was a warning. Around these creatures you could not show your face. You could not reveal your name, and you could not speak. If you did, you risked losing one or all of those things. That was why we wore the masks and why silence was so important. The only sounds in the room were the buzzing lights and the quiet hum of machines. I picked up the scalpel and looked at the creature lying in front of me. Under the harsh lights, its insides had a yellow tint, making the faces inside it look sick. Management had given clear instructions. They wanted the heart removed. The shape that I believed to be its heart twisted slightly as I brought the blade closer. It almost looked like it was reacting. I reached forward with my gloved hand and gently pressed against one of the larger vessels. At that moment, the lights flickered. I looked up quickly, but they returned to normal almost immediately. I paused, holding the scalpel just above the creature, unsure for a moment. Then I dismissed it as a simple fault. I leaned in closer to examine the strange organs. As soon as the blade touched the surface, there was a small metallic sound from above, and then everything went completely dark. The hum of the machine stopped at once. The silence that followed was heavy and unnatural. My heart started pounding and my breathing became shallow. I dropped the scalpel without thinking. It landed somewhere on the table with a wet sound. I reached forward quickly to grab it, but instead of touching metal, my hand closed around something warm and soft. Before I could react, it moved. It tightened around my hand, and I felt small, sharp teeth sink through my glove. The thin material tore easily. Pain shot through my fingers. My mouth opened on its own, and I screamed. Behind me, I heard Amy moving, her footsteps quick and uneven. I tried to move toward her, but I couldn't see anything. My eyes searched the darkness, imagining shapes moving around me. "Turn on the backup generator," I shouted, my voice shaking. There was no answer. I forced myself to move, reaching out in the dark, searching for the small light that marked the generator controls. My mask had slipped slightly, making it harder to see. I could barely make out the faint glow of the label. Frustrated, I pulled at the mask and let it fall to the floor. The light became clearer. I grabbed the switch and pulled it down hard. The generator roared to life with a loud crack, and a sudden burst of light filled the room. It was so bright that I flinched and stumbled back. My eyes burned as they adjusted. Slowly, shapes began to come into focus. On the floor, a short distance away, there was something pale and smooth. For a moment, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the realization hit me and my stomach turned. I looked back at the table. The creature was still there, its limbs held down by the restraints, but its body was no longer lying flat. Its upper half had twisted forward in a way that should not have been possible. Its mouth was stretched wide, far wider than any human mouth could go, as if its jaw had come apart. I raised my arms, trying to cover my face, but I already knew it was too late. Amy slowly stepped back into view. Her mask was still on, but I could see the fear in her posture. I told her as calmly as I could to lock down the lab and that we would continue the procedure the next day. She didn't argue. The next day came whether I wanted it to or not. I walked down the long hallway toward the lab. The lights above made the same dull sound as always. I adjusted my mask again, feeling the knot at the back tight and impossible to undo. My throat felt just as tight as I reached the door. I entered the code carefully. There were many numbers, long and complicated, since we couldn't rely on things like facial recognition. When the lock clicked open, my heart sank. Inside, the lab was dark. I stepped forward, expecting the lights to turn on, but nothing happened. I moved further in, thinking maybe the sensors were not picking me up. Still nothing. The only light came from small screens and panels, casting a dim glow across the room. I knew this place well. I had worked here long enough to move around without much trouble, or at least I thought I had. My foot hit something soft. I stopped immediately. It didn't feel like equipment. It felt wrong. I bent down slowly. A faint red light from a nearby screen was enough to show me what I had touched. It was Amy. Her body was lying on the floor. Her face was frozen, her mouth open. Her chest had been torn apart in a way that mirrored the creature we had worked on. I stumbled back, slipping on something wet. I fell hard onto the floor. My breath came in short, broken gasps, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Then I heard it, a slow, high-pitched creaking sound. The operating table. I lifted my head slowly, my vision shaking as fear took over. I expected to see the creature. Instead, I saw myself. It was my face, perfect in every detail, the shape, the skin, everything. But something about it was wrong. It looked like it had been made, like a copy formed from something artificial. The creature straightened up from the table. Its body was still open, but now its insides were different. The twisted shapes were gone. In their place were normal organs, human organs. Understanding hit me all at once. Amy, it had used her. I felt panic take over as I turned and ran. I crashed into tables and equipment as I made my way toward the door. I could hear it moving behind me, getting closer. I knew I wouldn't make it. At the last moment, I pulled open a small maintenance cupboard and threw myself inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. There was no sound from the other side. It didn't try to open the door. It didn't need to. It was waiting. It knew I couldn't stay here forever. It had time, more time than I did. It had already learned how to become human. It had my face now. I sat there in the darkness, trying to stay quiet, knowing that sooner or later I would have to come out. And when I did, it would be there, ready. and when it stepped out into the world, no one would know the difference.